Hello React Native developers, this episode is the opportunity to celebrate an app made by our community and to get better acquainted with one of the most powerful mathematical tools to build animations. Hello React Native developers, I hope you are well. William here, recording from beautiful Zurich, Switzerland. In this episode, we are looking at the Rainbow app. It's a crypto wallet, more specifically a wallet for Ethereum assets. And the app is done in React Native. There seems to be a great team of React Native developers behind the app, most notably Michael Ozdanik from React Native Reanimated, Gesture Handler, and React Navigation. And not only the app is made in React Native, it's also entirely open source. And not only the app is open source, but the specific component we're going to look at, this interactable graph, is also published as a standalone NPM package that you can use in your own app. It's using Reanimated 2, which makes sense. For such a use case, you really need Reanimated 2 for performance reasons, because in order to have the cursor following along the path, you need to execute some math, which is fairly trivial to do on the UI thread by executing some JavaScript code. In V1, in order to solve the equation of finding the Y position for the X value, we would need to create really a lot of animation nodes, and that would have some impact on performance, where here it's more or less some trivial JavaScript code we can execute on the UI thread. And we also need, you see here on the top, we need to format consistently the values on the UI thread, which cannot really be done in version 1. So using Reanimated 2 makes perfect sense. My goal with this video is to show you the mathematical tools used behind such graph interaction. So to enable you to build also similar graph interactions, but also to take this knowledge of how to manipulate Bezier curves onto other types of animations, like shape morphing, you name it. So how would we do this in React Native? There are a couple of steps and couple of math we need to use. So first, we have a list of values, a list of points, and we need to go from values to this nice curve. So we need to do some, instead of having straight lines, we need to do some smoothing between the points. There are a couple of algorithms you can use in order to do this. Here, we're going to use D3. Since the app is open source, they have built also some smoothing functions. We ship I think all of these actually smoothing functions part of Redash. So we basically took the code from the package and added the worklet directive. So you can run also such function on the UI thread. So you can also potentially modify the value of the points entirely on the UI thread, and based on straight lines, calculate the curve you need to apply. And then there are a couple of, so we go from points to Bezier curves, and we have these nice curves. And then we need to do two types of operations. So interpolate from one curve to the other. And that's what happens here when we switch from 1 month to 1 week to 1 day. So we have the same number of Bezier curves, and we just interpolate the values of all these Bezier curves from one to the other. And that will enable us to morph from one curve to the other. And then the last mathematical formula we need to apply is when I'm sliding the finger across the graph. So I have X value, which is the position of my finger. And then I need to find the Y value for this particular X position. So in Redash, we ship a function that allows you to get this value automatically. The math behind is super interesting. And finally, we have the Y value. We scaled prices to pixels on the screen so we can display the graph. So now we have the point pixel value with the finger we calculated. We need to go back to a price value and on the UI thread display here these values you see here and formatting the price on the UI thread. But what do you guys think? Can it be done in React Native? Let's have a look. Before we get started, one thing, if you're interested to learn the fundamentals of gestures and animations in React Native, I hope that you will check out my online course at startreactnative.dev. My goal with this course is to provide you with all the tools and knowledge necessary in order to build incredible user experiences in React Native that will run at 60 FPS even on low-end devices. So if you are interested to learn the fundamentals, I hope that you will check it out at startreactnative.dev. We are into VSCode. If you want to code along, the boilerplate project is available in the video description. And here I've built some graph using D3. I scraped the data from Coinbase, building the graph here using D3 again. So thanks to D3, we can go from points, straight lines to nice Bezier curves. In Redash, we provide a function that does exactly the same, and we have some scaling, which is linear, which I think is pretty easy to do. So you actually not necessarily need to use D3 in order to do this. We have our graphs and we have a state in our component, which is the graph that is selected. So here it's a graph at index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We are going to do this in 3 steps. First, we're going to move from this React state to an animation value and morph from one graph to the other when selecting a new value. And we're also going to animate the button selection. That's step 1. Step 2, we're going to build the gesture handler for this cursor that you see here. And we're going to make it so that it follows along with the finger, the path of the curves, and we're gonna use gesture handler, of course, and Redash to give us the Y value for the X position of the finger. Once we have the Y value, step 3 and final step, we're gonna use this value, this Y value, to go back to a data point, to a price value, and do the formatting and animation of these values on the UI thread. So 3 steps, and let's start with step 1. Morphing the graphs. And the first thing I'm going to do is this. I'm going to remove this React state into an animation value. So I'm going to I'm going to move everything to the UI thread. So selected becomes an animation value. And here I'm going to use current is 0. And since this one is now an animation value, we can start with the beginning, which is going to be to animate this button here. So, you know, the background selection. So this is going to become an animated style. And so this is going to become an animated view. So let's create this style. So we return here the same value, but so here it's dot value, it's a shared value. And we want to transition. So when we select, here we say selected dot value equals index, but it's going to be discrete. So you see it's move, but what we want is we want it to slide nicely, so we're going to do with timing. And now it slides nicely. Okay, now we need to update the graph. We need a couple of animation values to do this. We need 3, I think. No, we need 3 animation values. I know that we need 3 animation values. We need one animation value which for each graph. So the starting graph, the current graph, and the one we're transitioning to. So once we click here, so there is the previous graph and the new graph where we need to display. So we need 2 graphs. And then we need a transition value, so a value which is going to transition from 0 to 1 every time. And using these values, we're going to be able to morph the graphs. So let's create, so here we have current. This one is going to become an animation value. So use shared value. And we're going to create one for previous, called previous as well. Now, this is fair. Actually, can I call it for now? Current.value, okay. So now when we switch, previous.value becomes current.value. We swap. The current.value becomes the graph that we selected. So graphs at index and .data, okay. And now we need a transition from 0 to 1 in order to animate the graphs. Maybe before, let's do it step by step. Let's see if we can display at one value and then transition to it. So current here, the path becomes an animation value. And since we're going to transition, it's not a string anymore, but a path from redash. So this one becomes an animated path. And this is an animated props. Animated props. So let's create the path serialization in use animated props. Since we transition, so here I'm going to serialize, I'm going to serialize the path. So current.value.path. And here path is already a string, but actually we are going to import these guys. We're going to, instead of returning a string here, we're going to do, so this is the path. We're going to use parse from redash. And what parse is going to do is going to create an object representing these Bezier curves so that we can easily interpolate from one path to the other. So let's do it. And parse is from redash. Okay, so we have one path. That's good. Now let's create our transition value. So I'm going to create transition, use shared value. So transition always starts at 0 and then we transition to 1 when we click. So transition.value equals with also with timing to 1. Right, so here's the start value, finish value is 1. So now here we're gonna interpolate from previous and current. We have a function which is called, there is interpolate path, and then there is a mix path if your animation values is always from 0 to 1 and you go from one path to the other. It's like mix, but for paths. It's just a nice convenient function from redash. So transition.value, that goes from 0 to 1. And the first path, we go from previous.value to current.value. Dot path. Same here. So you see now it morphs from one shape to the other nicely. Isn't that cool? I really like these things. Okay, so that was step 1. Pretty easy. Now, and you see how we can use this to morph from any shape to the other, right? You can morph a square into a circle, Also in redash, this parse function, you can give it any SVG path and it will normalize. So it can be lines, it can be arcs, and we will normalize the path to be only a sequences of Bezier curves. And by normalizing the path into only a sequence of Bezier curves, we can treat shapes which seems to be super heterogeneous into an homogeneous manner. So can do a lot of cool things with it. So now let's do step 2, which is going to be to move this cursor along. And here we have the cursor, which we need to animate. We have the path, which we're going to need to calculate the Y position for next position given by the finger. So the finger directs the X position. And thanks to the path value, we're going to have the Y position. But it's not a string here anymore. It's a path from redash. So you see that's it doesn't look up to date, but let's see. So here we can use animated shared value. Of this type. I think here I need to update the version of redash. So path is a black box. You don't have to know how it looks like internally, but I can tell that it's using an old version. But that's fine. I will upgrade after. So that's why I got confused. So we have the data. So let's wrap. So we have the base. So we have the cursor, which is this component here. And here we have an absolute fill. And this is what we're going to wrap the gesture handler around, because we want basically to be able to put the finger everywhere in this area and then translate this part here. So this becomes an animated view because the first child of a pan gesture handler and the unique child is an animated view. So we're going to put the pan gesture handler. And this one also. So this is the component we're going to translate. We're going to add also an animated view. So up. And we need to create pan gesture handler from React Native gesture handler. And we need to add our gesture event. So we need use animated gesture handler. We need a couple of things. We need to know if the gesture is active or not, because on the Rainbow app, this cursor, you don't see it if the gesture is not active. So I'm going to create active is false, use shared value false. And we need to create a X value, which we're going to assign to know the X position of the cursor. So on start, active is true. On end, active is false. Active.value is false. On active, okay, perfect. On active, X.value is the X position of the finger. Sorry. Is event.x. And now I think we have enough to create the style to move this guy here. So let's create a style. So use animated style. And So opacity is, and we can add, I guess, some transition to it. So is timing of active.value true is 1 or 4 or 0 if it's false. And maybe I need actually, so I'm gonna move this into, okay, return statement. Can assign the style here to the animated view. So now we can add the transform. So we can do translate x is x.value, and translate y, we need the y value on the path for the x value. And so here we use get y for x from redash. We give it a path, which we get here as a, so data.path. So data, I guess, dot value dot path. And we give it an x value. So this function, get y x for y, and here let me write the transform. So we have translate x, translate y. So, okay. Let's see, number, up. Okay. So nothing is happening. Let me just put a random value to see if it's the issue. So the x value works. I think, was it just, I needed to refresh? Yeah, that looks good. So opacity, I can put back what I wrote. So we move the finger, it follows along the path. We need, you see what follows the path here is the, as it should be, the top left corner of this component. And we can center it. So by doing, so the size is cursor divided by 2 on x and y. So now you see it's perfectly centered in the middle. So cursor is the size here of this component. What this function does, it knows, we know that the path is a sequence of Bezier curve. And we parse a path, it can be a completely heterogeneous path. We normalize it into a sequence of Bezier curves. We look at the x value, we select which curve is within this range of x, and then we use a formula that it's a polynomial of third degree, so degree 3, to find the y value for this particular curve. And so to find t for this particular curve, and from t we use the cubic Bezier formula to get the y value. And so this is how we're able to nicely follow along the path. So that was step 2. Now step 3 is formatting these values here. And so we're gonna, here to show the graph, we go from prices to points. Now we have the y value here. So we're gonna go back from points to prices and display these values on the UI thread, which since, so this is this component here, the header, we need the y value. So I'm gonna extract y here into the main component. So I'm gonna create y as a shared value. And we're gonna assign it in cursor. So cursor assigns the value based on the x position, and header reads it to format its value. So I'm gonna pass it here and pass it here also. So here we have y, which is an animated shared value. And so here we're gonna use y.value directly and assign it into onActive. That's also, I guess, more efficient because here we want to calculate x for y only when the y value changes. So it's almost like as if we memorize the y value. So actually it's much better like this, I think. So it still works, and now we have access to the y value from the header. So this one here becomes a shared value. So now we need to animate these here. So this one becomes a shared value, and we have y, which is also a shared value. So these guys here now are dynamic, so are done on the UI thread. And here you see we use text. So we're going to use retext from redash, where basically we can assign a string animation value, which will animate the text. So I'm going to, well, I need to do a couple of things here. We need to move these into derived values. These become animation values now. And then use a retext here. So let's do it quickly. Bear with me. So this price becomes a derived value because here it's data.value, max price, and up. Use derived value. Same here. Up. So same, it's dot value. Thank God for TypeScript. Same here for label. Label is use derived value. What was it? Data.value.label? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And same here for style. It becomes a use animated style. Because the color here is interpolated from the animation value. Something like this, data.value. Okay, so where do we use style? Here. Okay, so this becomes retext, and text is % change, which has become an animation value because we use derived value. Same everywhere. Here, label, text is label, and here as well. So it will be retext from redash. And undefined. And this value we need to actually interpolate based on the y value, but let me, it doesn't seem to be happy. Yeah, of course, I need to remove. You see, again, TypeScript. I mean, I think most of you are already convinced, but if you are not, every time you watch such a video, you see that it's a lifesaver every time. So here I change the graph, the value changes. That's good, the color, everything. And now we need to use the y value to interpolate this value. So to scale, we scaled from values to points. Now we're gonna go back from points to prices. And this is why also at the beginning I mentioned, oh, we are using D3. You could use it without D3. So here the scale is so simple that we're going to be able to calculate it easily on the UI thread. And this is why you don't really need D3 for such an example. Because you see here we have to build our own interpolation anyways. It's simple interpolation. And I should mention also here, you see that originally this local formatting was done on the JavaScript thread. We switched to do this formatting on the UI thread completely seamlessly. So you can have like consistent formatting between UI thread, JavaScript thread, which is a novelty in Reanimated 2, and I find it to be extremely convenient. So now let's interpolate here the price value depending on Y. So we interpolate on Y.value. The input range goes from so at 0 it's size, and then at maximum value it's max price, it's 0, right? Translation 0 here, and so that would be min price, max price. So that would be data.value.min price, data.value.max price. We need to import interpolate. And even the local toString, even the rounding of the number, I just love that we can do these things consistently between JavaScript thread and UI thread. So you see now the value goes up, gets updated nicely with the cursor entirely on the UI thread, and the formatting of the value, the rounding of the value is also done consistently between UI thread and JavaScript thread. Isn't that cool? Guys, I hope you enjoyed this example. Here we use a couple of tools around Bezier curves in order to build this interactive graph. So morphing from one curve to the other, creating curves from data points, and sliding an object along a curve. Here we use it for interactable graphs, but this tool is super versatile and we can use it for other types of animation use cases, for instance, shape morphing. And we're starting to leverage the power of Reanimated 2, not only to run these mathematical tools efficiently on the UI thread, but also to do things like formatting the values entirely on the UI thread. In the next Can It Be in React Native, we're gonna again leverage the power of Reanimated 2 in order to build an incredible example. So I am looking forward to talk to you soon, and until next time, happy hacking.